At 3 a.m., the cold, empty space beside me jolted me awake. Downstairs, I found my husband's phone left on the kitchen counter. Then the back gate suddenly creaked open. Peeking through the door, I was stunned to see my husband sneaking across the yard. I quickly threw on a jacket, heart pounding, and followed through the dark streets. When he stopped in front of a strange house at the end of the block, I froze at what happened next. I'm so grateful you're here. To help us connect, I'd love to know where you are watching from. Which country or city are you in? Let me know in the comments. Also, please note, this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is coincidental, but the message conveyed is useful. The first thing you need to understand about Daniel Carter is that he never forgot anything. Not the name of a patient he had seen once 3 years prior, not the anniversary of a colleague's promotion, not the exact date our neighbor Mrs. Harmon's cat went missing, a detail so irrelevant that I had forgotten it the moment she mentioned it. Daniel stored everything. He was the kind of man who could recite the serial number on our first refrigerator without blinking. His memory was the thing people admired most about him, the quality that made him exceptional as a psychologist, magnetic at dinner parties, and I had always believed utterly trustworthy as a husband. So when I woke at 3:12 in the morning on a Wednesday in October and found the space beside me empty, I told myself it was nothing. The sheets on his side were cool. He had been gone long enough for the warmth to leave. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom in house number 24, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood. A distant car, the soft creak of the oak tree outside, the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I told myself he had gone for water, or that he was in his office reviewing case notes, which he sometimes did when a patient's situation weighed on him. Daniel worked long hours and carried his work seriously. That was one of the reasons I had fallen in love with him 15 years ago, his absolute dedication to whatever he chose to care for. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes, but I could not sleep. There was something in the quality of the silence that felt wrong. Not loud wrong, just slightly off the way a painting hangs crooked by a fraction of an inch, and your eye catches it before your brain does. I sat up slowly and listened again. The house was the same as always, quiet, orderly, safe. Yet something in my chest would not settle, a low, persistent unease that had no name yet and refused to be reasoned away. I got out of bed without turning on the light. My feet found the floor and I crossed the hallway, passing Leo's door slightly open the way he always left it. I glanced in. My son was exactly where he should be, curled on his side with one arm hanging off the mattress, his dark hair covering half his face. 10 years old and already sleeping like a teenager. I adjusted his blanket out of habit and continued downstairs. The kitchen was dark. No light under the office door at the end of the hall. No sound of the television. I stood at the counter and let my eyes adjust to the dim glow coming through the window above the sink. That was when I saw it. Daniel's phone, his personal phone, the one with the cracked corner on the black leather case that he had refused to replace for 8 months, was sitting on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. Face up, screen dark. I stared at it. Daniel never left his personal phone behind. In 15 years of marriage, I had never once seen that phone on a counter, a table, or a shelf, without Daniel within arm's reach of it. He slept with it plugged in on his nightstand. He carried it to the bathroom. He once turned a car around on the highway because he thought he had left it at home, only to find it in his coat pocket. It was one of those small, consistent behaviors that a person does not notice until the day it changes, and on the day it changes, it is impossible to unsee. I picked it up. My hands were steady, which surprised me because my heart was not. The screen stayed dark. I held it and thought carefully, the way I make myself think when something is wrong and panic is not useful. Daniel had 2 phones, his personal phone currently in my hand, and a second phone he described as his work line for client-related calls. He had explained it early in our marriage in the calm, professional tone he used for things he considered settled. Patient confidentiality required a dedicated line separate from our family network. It had made sense. He was a licensed psychologist, Privacy protocols were real. I set the phone back on the counter exactly as I had found it. Then I heard something, a sound from the back of the house, soft, metallic, deliberate. The garden gate latch lifting. I knew that latch by feel and by sound, the way I knew the creak of the third stair and the pitch of the front door when it needed oiling. I had opened that gate 1,000 times. It had a specific click, a half-second delay, and then a soft swing. I moved to the window and looked out. Daniel was crossing the back garden, dressed dark jacket, dark trousers, shoes already on. His posture was easy and unhurried, the walk of a man who knew exactly where he was going. He reached the gate in 8 steps, lifted the latch in the practiced way of someone who has done it many times in the dark, and passed through without pausing. My hands pressed flat against the counter. My breath came short and shallow, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to shrink around me. I counted to 5. Then I took my cardigan from the hook by the door, slipped on my shoes, picked up my house keys from the small dish on the hall table, and followed him into the October dark. The alley behind our row of houses was narrow and unlit except for the distant amber glow of a street lamp at the far end. Daniel's figure moved steadily ahead, hands in his pockets, heading east without looking back. I kept my distance, stayed close to the fence line, my footsteps quiet on the gravel. My heart was beating hard and fast in a way I could feel in my ears. I kept my breathing even. I focused on his silhouette and the distance between us. He turned left at the end of the alley onto the narrow lane behind the east side of our street. I followed. He did not look back once. That detail stayed with me as I moved through the dark 30 feet behind him, my hand trailing along the cold iron of a fence I could barely see. A man who never forgot anything, walking in a back alley at 3 in the morning, and he did not once think to check whether anyone was behind him. Either he was completely certain he was alone, or he had done this so many times that caution had long since stopped feeling necessary. Both possibilities made my stomach turn. The lane curved east and narrowed. The houses on this side of the block were smaller, tighter lots, older trees, porch lights off after 9. I counted gate posts as I walked. 7, 8. Daniel slowed, and I pressed myself flat against a wooden fence, shoulder blades against the boards, breath held like something fragile. He stopped near the end of the row. Number 9. A single-story house with a covered porch, one window lit amber on the left, curtain drawn. A climbing rosebush grew up the right side of the porch rail, winter bare, its canes pale as bone in the dark. Daniel stood at the gate for exactly 2 seconds. Then he knocked 3 short taps and 1 long one, the kind of sequence that is not accidental. My legs had started to tremble. The gate opened. A woman stood in the gap, around 32, dark hair loose around her shoulders, barefoot despite the cold, wearing a pale cream sleep shirt that stopped at her knees. She had the look of someone who had been awake and waiting, not startled, not surprised, just quietly relieved. "You took forever," she said. Low voice, not angry, the opposite of angry, which somehow felt worse. Daniel stepped through and pulled the gate shut. "I'm here. Nothing happened. The pump, already fixed. Caleb came by an hour ago." She stepped back and he followed her without pausing. The way a man walks into a house he knows as well as his own. The front door opened and closed. I stood frozen at the fence. The October cold pressed against my face. The faint smell of wood smoke drifted down the lane. That amber rectangle glowed warmly through the curtain, and my throat was already burning by the time I registered it, my jaw clenched so tightly I could feel it in my temples. My feet carried me forward without my deciding to move. I crossed the lane and stopped at the edge of the porch, partially hidden by the rosebush canes. I could hear voices through the glass, low, indistinct, and then a third voice, a child's voice. "Dad?" One word, clear, certain. I pressed my hand over my mouth. "Hey, buddy." Daniel's voice, warm, easy, the exact tone he used with Leo on Saturday mornings. "You actually came." "I always come." A pause, then the child again. "Promise. I promise." My hand was shaking against my mouth. I pulled it away and pressed my palm flat against the wooden siding instead, needing something solid. The surface was cold and slightly damp. I focused on that, the grain of the painted wood, the cold working into my palm. Because the alternative was to stop functioning entirely, and I refused to allow that. I had a son 10 years old sleeping in our house 300 meters from where I was standing, a mortgage with my name on it, a coffee maker with Daniel's personal phone beside it on the kitchen counter. 15 years of a life I believed was real. And Daniel had a boy who called him Dad, in a house at the end of a lane I had never had a reason to walk down before tonight. I do not know how long I stood there, long enough for the voices to settle into the comfortable quiet of people at ease with each other, long enough for my legs to stop trembling and go simply numb. At some point, the child's voice faded, replaced by the soft sound of footsteps moving down a hallway toward a bedroom. At 4:17 in the morning, the amber light went dark. I walked back the way I had come. My steps were steady. My face was wet, which I noticed only when the cold air moved against my cheeks. I did not wipe it. I went through our gate up the back steps into the kitchen. Daniel's phone was still on the counter. Face up, screen dark. I checked on Leo. He had turned onto his back in his sleep, one arm above his head, the blue nightlight casting its familiar glow across his ceiling. I stood in his doorway and watched him breathe. Then I lay down on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling. I was not going to cry. Not here, not tonight. I was going to think. And so I did for the next 2 hours and 18 minutes, flat on my back in the dark, while Daniel's side of the bed remained empty and the house held its breath around me. I did not reach for my phone. I did not cry. I lay still, and I let my mind do what it was built to do, which was organize, sort, arrange the facts in a row, and look at what they formed when placed in sequence. Fact: Daniel had left our house at 3:15 in the morning through the back gate. Fact: he had gone to house number 9, 300 meters east, and knocked on the gate in a pattern that was not accidental. Fact: a woman had opened that gate, a woman who had been awake and waiting, who had spoken to him with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Fact: a boy inside that house had called him Dad. I had known Daniel Carter for 17 years. I had been married to him for 15. I had shared a bed with him, a bank account, a mortgage, a child, a kitchen, a last name. I believed I knew the architecture of his life, as well as I knew the layout of our house, every room, every corner, every door, and what was behind it. I had been wrong about the doors. By 5:45, I had made a decision. I would not confront him, not yet, not without knowing exactly what I was dealing with, not without understanding the full shape of what he had built behind my back. Daniel was a psychologist. He was trained to read emotion, to manage conversation, to redirect and reframe. If I came at him with raw accusation and nothing else, he would know how to handle it. He would be calm. He would have an explanation ready, plausible, detailed, delivered in that steady voice that made you feel slightly unreasonable for doubting him. I needed more than what I had seen. I needed proof. I got up at 6:15, moved quietly to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. My eyes were dry. My face was composed. Good. I dressed, went downstairs, and started the coffee. Leo appeared at 6:43, still in his pajamas, his dark hair pressed flat on one side from his pillow. He dropped into his chair at the kitchen table with the theatrical exhaustion of a 10-year-old who considers waking before 7 a personal injustice. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning, baby." I set a glass of orange juice in front of him. "Scrambled eggs or cereal?" "Eggs." A pause. "Can I have toast too?" "You can have toast too." He looked up then, studying me the way children sometimes do, direct and unfiltered, no social filter softening the observation. "You look tired," he said. "I didn't sleep well." This was true. It was also carefully incomplete, which was not the same as a lie. "Finish your juice." I was cracking the second egg into the pan when I heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs. I knew his step the same way I knew the gate latch by its particular rhythm, the slight heavier fall on the left foot from an old running injury, 6:52. I had not heard him come in. I registered this without turning around, and I kept my face toward the stove. "Morning." His voice was easy, warm, entirely ordinary. "Morning," I said. I did not look up from the pan. He crossed to the coffee maker, poured a mug and leaned against the counter, in the way he always did in the morning, unhurried the mug held in both hands, watching the kitchen come to life. I could feel him there 6 feet to my left, and the specific effort of not reacting to his presence took everything I had. "Early morning," I asked. My voice came out level, calm. I was quietly impressed with myself. "Patient crisis," he said. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed until it sounds unrehearsed. "Called the crisis line around 2. I handled it remotely, but it took a while." He took a sip of coffee. "I didn't want to wake you." "You didn't," I said. He moved to the table and ruffled Leo's hair, which made Leo duck and protest with his mouth full of orange juice. "Hey, bud. Big day." "Field trip," Leo said, swallowing. "The Science Museum. Mom signed the slip." "Yeah." Daniel sat down across from him, entirely at ease. "What exhibit B? Space. And there's a section on geology." Leo made the face that meant he was more interested than he was willing to admit. "It might be okay." Daniel laughed his real laugh, the easy one, not the performance he used at events. I pressed the spatula against the eggs in the pan and kept my eyes there, watching the edges set even and slow. My jaw ached. I had been clenching it without realizing. I put Leo's plate in front of him and set Daniel's beside his coffee cup, then turned back to the counter with my own mug and stood with my back to the table for exactly 5 seconds. 5 seconds was all I allowed myself. Then I turned around, sat down at my own place, wrapped both hands around my mug, and looked across the table at my husband. He met my eyes. He smiled, small, warm, entirely practiced. The smile of a man who had nothing to hide. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded once and looked back at Leo, who was describing the difference between igneous and sedimentary rock with a level of detail that suggested he had been waiting for an audience. Daniel listened with his full attention, the way he always did, asking the right questions at the right moments, his whole posture leaning slightly forward. I watched him. "I thought I know what you did at 3:15 this morning. I know the pattern you knocked. I know her name is not in my phone, and there is a boy who calls you the same thing my son calls you. And you are sitting here at this table with your coffee and your easy laugh, and you believe I have no idea. I thought, you are about to find out what kind of person I am." I finished my coffee. I cleared the plates. I kissed Leo on the top of his head and told him his backpack was by the front door. I walked Daniel to the front hall the way I did every morning, and I stood in the doorway while he picked up his bag. "Have a good day," I said. "You too." He kissed me on the cheek. His lips were warm. I closed the door behind him. I stood in the hall for 3 seconds listening to his car back out of the driveway. Then I walked to the kitchen table, sat down, pulled my phone from my cardigan pocket, and opened the browser. I typed 2 words into the search bar: forensic accountant. The investigation had begun. I want to be precise about what that meant, because it did not mean what people imagine when they picture a betrayed wife tearing through her husband's belongings in a fury of tears and broken glass. There were no tears. There was no fury, not yet, not in any form I allowed myself to express. What there was that Wednesday afternoon, after Leo left for school and Daniel left for his office, was a particular quality of cold clarity that I had not felt since the year I defended my graduate thesis under a panel of 3 professors who wanted me to fail. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I knew. Not everything I felt, everything I knew. Daniel had 2 phones. He had a second residence he visited in the early hours of the morning. A woman lived there. A boy lived there, who was approximately Leo's age, 10 years old, possibly within a year either way. And that boy called Daniel by the same name my son used. The woman had referred to someone named Caleb, who had apparently repaired a pump, and she had spoken to Daniel with the ease of a long-established relationship. Daniel had knocked on her gate in a specific pattern. He had not used his personal phone to receive her message. He had used the second phone. I underlined that last point 3 times. Then I went to his office. Daniel's home office was at the back of the house past the laundry room, a room he kept organized with the precision of someone who believed that a person's environment reflected the order of their mind. Bookshelves along 2 walls arranged by subject. A wide oak desk with nothing on it except a lamp, a monitor, a leather-bound planner, and a small ceramic dish that held 2 pens and a paperclip. He had always been particular about that room. Not secretive particular. There was a difference, or so I had always told myself. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the familiar order of it, and then I walked to the desk and opened the top drawer. His leather-bound planner was the kind he had used for years, the same brand, the same size, replaced each January with a fresh one. The current year's planner was in the drawer as expected. I opened it to the month of October and read each entry carefully. Patient appointments written in his standard abbreviation format. A dinner reservation for our anniversary, which was still 3 weeks away. Leo's school conference on the 14th. The kind of life that looked in aggregate completely ordinary. I put it back exactly as I had found it. Then I looked at the shelf behind the desk. There were 11 planners lined up in a row, spines facing out, each labeled with a year in Daniel's handwriting. 11 years of them. I had known about this habit. He had always kept his old planners, citing the occasional professional need to reference past notes. I had never had a reason to look at them closely. I pulled the one from 4 years ago off the shelf. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it and understood why immediately. Inside the back cover, tucked into the interior pocket, was a second, smaller notebook. Spiral-bound, the kind sold in bulk at office supply stores, the cover a plain dark blue. I opened it. The handwriting was Daniel's. The dates were Daniel's. The abbreviations were Daniel's, but the names were not. Where his main planner recorded our life, Leo's pediatric appointments, our mortgage review date, my birthday, our vacation in July. This notebook recorded another one. Parallel entries sometimes on the same dates. A boy's school schedule. Parent-teacher conferences. A birthday in April. Medical appointments for a child with an ear infection the same week Leo had strep throat. Grocery lists in Daniel's handwriting that included juice boxes and dinosaur-shaped pasta. My hands had begun to tremble. I was aware of it the way you are aware of weather, not as something happening to you, but as a condition of the surrounding world. I set the notebook flat on the desk and smoothed the page with one hand, steadying myself against the oak surface, and kept reading. The entries went back years, 11 years at minimum, judging by the wear on the oldest notebooks I found tucked behind the current planner row. 3 more of them, same dark blue covers, same handwriting, building a chronology of a life I had never known existed. 11 years. Leo was 10. The math assembled itself without my permission and landed in my chest like something physical. Daniel had been maintaining 2 families for longer than our son had been alive. I stood at his desk for a long time after that. The afternoon light moved across the floor. I heard the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly, its engine fading, until the street was quiet again. I breathed in and out carefully, the way you breathe when you are trying to keep something very large from moving too fast. Then I took out my phone and photographed every page of every notebook. Methodically. Without rushing. The light was good, and my hands by then had stopped shaking. I replaced the notebooks exactly as I had found them behind the planners, in the correct order, the current year's small notebook back inside its planner's rear pocket. I straightened the ceramic dish with its 2 pens. I pushed the desk chair in. I walked out of his office and pulled the door to its original position, not fully closed, because it had not been fully closed when I entered. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the back garden. The gate at the far end was closed. Beyond it, 300 meters east, house number 9 sat on its quiet lane. Its porch covered its rosebush bare. 11 years. I set the glass down. He had not built a secret. He had built a system. And the difference between those two things was the difference between a man who had made a terrible mistake and a man who had made a deliberate choice, maintained it with precision, and trusted that no one would ever look closely enough to see it. He had been wrong about that. I picked up my phone and found the name I had searched that morning. Then I dialed. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, professional, direct, unhurried. Karen Lawson. Ms. Lawson, I said. My name is Emily Carter. I need to speak with a forensic accountant. I believe my husband has been running a second household for 11 years, and I need to know exactly what that has cost. A brief pause. Then, can you come in tomorrow morning? Yes, I said. I can. I had scheduled Karen Lawson for Friday morning. That gave me Thursday to keep the surface of my life intact. Leo to school, the grocery order, placed, the dry cleaning picked up, and the electrician let in to look at the flickering panel in the laundry room that Daniel had been meaning to call about for 6 weeks. He had added it to his planner 3 times and never followed through. I had made the call myself the previous Monday before any of this, back when my life still had the shape I believed it had. The electrician arrived at 9:15. He knocked at the front door with the unhurried knock of a man who has been doing a job long enough to know that urgency rarely helps anything. When I opened the door, I found a man in his late 60s, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped, with a face that had spent decades in all kinds of weather, and seemed content with the result. His hands were the kind that belong to someone who has fixed things his whole life, large, deliberate, the knuckles prominent, a faint scar along the back of the right one. Mrs. Carter, he said. Silas, you called about a panel issue. I did. Come in. I stepped back and let him through. It's in the laundry room at the back. He followed me down the hall, his toolbox making a low metallic sound with each step, looking around the house in the mild observational way of a tradesman who has been in 1,000 homes and holds no particular opinion about any of them. I showed him the panel. He opened his toolbox, pulled out a small flashlight, and got to work with the quiet focus of someone who prefers to diagnose before he speaks. I made coffee. It was something to do with my hands. After about 15 minutes, he appeared in the kitchen doorway. Loose connection on the secondary breaker, he said. Easy fix, 20 minutes. He accepted the coffee I offered with a nod and leaned against the doorframe while he drank it in no hurry. Nice street, he said. Quiet. Usually, I said. I did some work a couple streets over last week. He tilted his head east. Pump issue. Middle of the night call, apparently neighbor's son rang me at 2 in the morning. He shook his head with the mild tolerance of someone accustomed to irregular hours. House on the lane behind yours, actually. Small place. Number 9. The coffee mug in my hand was warm. I focused on that warmth, the specific pressure of ceramic against my palm, and kept my face exactly as it was. Is that right? I said. Not a question. A placeholder, the kind you use when you need 3 seconds to decide what to say next. Young woman there on her own, mostly. Nice enough. My son Caleb, he does odd jobs on the side, electrical plumbing she calls him when something needs doing. Silas took another sip of his coffee. He fixed the pump same night, 2 in the morning. I told him he charges too little for that kind of thing, but he's soft-hearted, always has been. I set my mug down on the counter and picked up a dish towel, more for the occupation of it than any practical purpose. Your son does work around this area often. Here and there, he's good with his hands like his father. A slight pause. Something shifted in the old man's expression, not quite trouble, but adjacent to it. Going through a rough patch at the moment, though. Work's been slow. He said it plainly, without self-pity, the way people state facts they have accepted. He'll be all right. Always lands on his feet. I'm glad to hear it, I said. And I was. But what I was thinking, what I was turning over very carefully in the back of my mind, while I folded the dish towel into a neat rectangle, was this: Caleb had been inside house number 9 at 2 in the morning. Caleb had fixed a pump that hours later Daniel had been summoned to check on. A pump in a house that Daniel visited through a back gate with a practiced knock. Caleb had been there before Daniel arrived. which meant Caleb had seen the house, had likely seen the interior, had fixed things there before, possibly many times, if Lisa trusted him enough to call at 2 in the morning when something broke. Silas knew the house. His son knew the house. I thought about the notebook in Daniel's desk. The grocery lists, the school schedules, the medical appointments maintained in parallel with our own. I thought about the word system, the one I had used in my own mind, the night before standing at Daniel's desk in the fading afternoon light. A system requires maintenance. It requires people who fix things when they break, not people who know the full picture, just people who show up when called, do their job, and leave. People who, in the ordinary course of their work, accumulate fragments of information they do not know are fragments at all. Silas finished his coffee and set the mug on the counter with a small, satisfied sound. "Better get back to it," he said. "I'll have you sorted in 20 minutes. "Take your time," I said. He went back down the hall. I heard the panel open, the soft metallic sounds of his work beginning again, unhurried and precise. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the back garden, at the gate, at the particular angle of the morning light on the fence boards. Caleb, house number 9. A pump, a 2 in the morning call, a father who spoke about his son with a worried pride that he was trying not to show. I did not yet know exactly how Caleb fit into what I was building, but I had learned in the past 48 hours to treat every fragment with care. You do not discard what you do not yet understand. You hold it. You keep it where you can find it again when the larger picture becomes clear enough to place it in. I picked up my phone and added a note. Silas electrician, son Caleb, works odd jobs, house number 9. Pump repair 2 a.m. Wednesday. I read it back once. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to ask Silas if he wanted a second cup of coffee. He did. We talked for another 10 minutes while he finished the repair about the neighborhood, about the way older houses needed more attention than newer ones, about the particular satisfaction of fixing something that had been neglected. He spoke about his work the way people speak about things they love, without having ever needed to say so out loud. When he packed up his toolbox and I walked him to the front door, I asked as naturally as I could manage whether his son did general home maintenance work or primarily electrical and plumbing. Silas looked at me with the mild, assessing expression of a man who has learned to read people without appearing to. "Caleb does most things," he said. "Why, you have something that needs doing?" "I have a list," I said. "Daniel is handy in theory but not in practice." This was true enough to say without discomfort. "If Caleb is looking for work, I would pay fairly. Tell him to call me." Silas nodded once, the way men of his generation nod when they have made a decision. "I'll tell him," he said. "He could use the work." Caleb called that afternoon at 4. His voice was low and careful, the voice of someone who has learned to be slightly apologetic about asking for things. I told him I had a list of small repairs, a bathroom faucet, a stuck window in the spare room, some loose boards on the back porch, and asked whether he was available Saturday morning. He said he was. I gave him the address. He arrived at 9 on Saturday with a canvas bag of tools and a takeout coffee that he was still working on when I opened the door. He was around 30, lean in the way of someone who stays thin from activity, rather than intention, with dark circles under his eyes, that suggested the slow kind of tired that does not come from one bad night. His jacket was clean but worn at the elbows. He looked at the house number above the door when I opened it, confirming the address, then looked at me. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "Emily," I said. "Come in." He worked steadily through the morning. The faucet first, then the window, then the porch boards, each one handled with the quiet competence of someone who knows the right way to do a thing and does it that way without ceremony. I brought him coffee and let him work, checking in, only to approve each task as he finished. Leo was at a friend's house for the morning. The house was quiet. At 11:30, I asked if he wanted to stop for lunch. He hesitated, the hesitation of someone calculating whether accepting felt too familiar, and I said, "There's a diner 2 blocks over, my treat for the work this morning." He agreed after a moment in the way people agree to things when they are tired and the offer is genuinely kind. We sat across from each other in a corner booth. He ordered black coffee and a sandwich, and ate with the focused efficiency of someone who does not always know when the next meal is coming. I ordered the same and waited until he had eaten most of it before I said anything beyond small talk. Your father mentioned you've been busy in this area, I said. A few houses on the lane behind mine. He looked up. Something shifted in his expression, not suspicion, exactly more a kind of careful attention. Here and there, he said. The woman at number 9? I said, keeping my voice easy. He mentioned you helped her with a pump recently. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. She's a good person, he said finally. On her own a lot. She calls when things break and I come fix them. He said it simply without elaboration, the statement of someone who considers this arrangement self-explanatory. That's good of you, I said, and I meant it. Whatever Lisa Harper was or was not, that part was real. Has the house got much wrong with it? He relaxed slightly. The topic of houses and repairs was comfortable ground. Older plumbing, he said. The panel is outdated. She's had me out maybe 6-7 times over the past 2 years. Small things mostly. He paused. The layout's a bit unusual. The utility room is at the front, which is backwards from most houses on that lane. Makes the pipe runs longer than they should be. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, the automatic gesture of someone who thinks with his hands, and before I said anything, he had sketched on his paper napkin a quick instinctive diagram. Front door, utility room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms back. The pump location marked with a small X. He pushed it across the table to explain the plumbing issue. I looked at it. I kept my expression at the level of mild, polite interest. That does seem backwards, I said. He nodded. Makes everything harder than it needs to be. He finished his coffee. Anyway, she keeps the place nice. It's a good little house. I folded the napkin once and set it on my side of the table. I may have a few more things at my place in the coming weeks, I said. If you're available. Sure, he said. Just call. I paid the check. We walked back to the house and I settled up for the morning's work cash, slightly more than the amount he named, which made him look at me with a brief, unguarded surprise before he put it in his pocket. I thanked him at the door. He said he would come back whenever I needed. After I closed the door, I stood in the hall for a moment, the folded napkin in my hand. I thought about the word kindness, about how it was possible for an act to be both genuine and purposeful at the same time, to actually wish a person well, to actually want to help, and to also understand that their presence in your life had arrived at a moment when you needed exactly what they had to offer. I had not manufactured warmth toward Caleb. The warmth was real. He was a good person doing his best under difficult circumstances, and I hoped things got easier for him. But I had also just acquired a hand-drawn layout of house number 9. I unfolded the napkin and studied it carefully. Utility room at the front, kitchen to the right, 2 bedrooms at the back, a small hallway between them, and at the end of it, marked in Caleb's quick, practical lines, a door that opened to the back garden. A back door, which meant there was a second way in. I do not mean that literally I was not going to enter house number 9 through a back door or any other door. What I mean is that the layout Caleb had drawn on that napkin gave me something I had not had before, a physical understanding of the space. I now knew where the rooms were, where the utility access sat, and most importantly, that the house had a rear exit onto the same network of lanes that connected to our back gate. Daniel had not been walking to a location that required him to leave our street entirely. He had been walking 300 meters through a shared system of back alleys that neither of us had ever had reason to discuss. The proximity was not incidental. It was deliberate. I filed the napkin in a folder I had labeled with deliberate blandness, home maintenance, and kept it in the desk drawer in the spare room. Then I sat down with my laptop and began the part of the investigation I had been thinking about since Wednesday night, the digital record. People believe that deleting something makes it gone. Daniel was intelligent enough to know this was not entirely true, but he was also, I had come to understand, a man who trusted his own systems. He had maintained a parallel life for 11 years with careful physical records, the notebooks, the separate phone, the practiced routines. What he may not have accounted for was the way that digital lives accumulate evidence, not in the places you think to clear, but in the places you forget exist. I started with our shared family cloud account. We had set it up 4 years ago when Leo started school, and we wanted a central place for family photos and shared documents. Daniel had his own account, but had connected it to the family folder for the sake of convenience. He had told me this himself. I opened the account and navigated to the shared photo library. The visible folder was exactly what it should have been. Leo's birthday parties, a vacation at the lake school events, Christmas mornings, the ordinary photographic record of a family life. I scrolled through it without stopping, not because I expected to find anything there, but because I was looking for something specific: gaps. Dates where photos should reasonably exist and did not. I found them. A long weekend in March 2 years ago. Daniel had told me he was attending a professional development conference in Boston. I remembered it clearly because Leo had been sick that weekend with a fever, and I had managed it alone, and Daniel had called each evening to check in, his voice carrying the slightly hollow quality of hotel room acoustics. 3 days. No photos in our shared folder from that period, which was not unusual. He rarely uploaded conference photos. I clicked into the account settings and navigated to the recently deleted folder. It had not been emptied. I do not know whether Daniel forgot that deleted items remain in a recovery folder for 30 days before permanent deletion, or whether he had cleared it at some point, and these particular files had been re-added when the account synced across devices. What I know is that there were 43 photos in the deleted folder, and they were not conference photos. They were family photos, a different family. Daniel, at what appeared to be a park, I recognized the style of the playground equipment as the kind common to Chicago's North Side. Beside him, a boy of approximately 8 years old at the time of the photo, dark-haired, wearing a red jacket, laughing at something off camera with his whole face. Daniel's hand on the boy's shoulder. Daniel's expression open and unguarded in a way I recognized from our own early family photos from the years before whatever this was had become normal to him. I sat very still with my hands flat on either side of the laptop. In the bottom corner of each photo, the timestamp was preserved. Saturday, March 14th. The conference in Boston had been Friday through Sunday, March 13th through 15th. Daniel had not been in Boston. Or if he had been in Boston at some point during those 3 days, he had also been in Chicago at a North Side park with a boy in a red jacket on Saturday the 14th. And he had deleted the photos from our shared cloud account, which meant he had uploaded them there at some point, possibly by accident, the automatic sync doing what it was designed to do before he caught and corrected it. My hands were not shaking. I noticed this with a detached sort of clarity, the way you notice things about yourself in moments of extreme stillness. My hands were entirely flat and still on the table. My breathing was even. The only indication that anything had shifted was a very specific tightness behind my sternum, the physical location of something that was not grief and not quite fury, but something that lived between them, a cold, compressed certainty that was, I realized, worse than either. I photographed every image on the screen with my phone. I noted the timestamps. I navigated back through the deleted folder and found 3 other clusters: a birthday party I had not been told about, a school event, marked with a date that corresponded to a day Daniel had told me he was working late, and a single image taken from inside a house I now recognized from Caleb's napkin drawing of a small boy, asleep on a couch, a dinosaur print blanket pulled up to his chin. I knew that couch was in house number 9. I knew that blanket. At dinner that evening, Daniel was easy and pleasant, asking Leo about his afternoon, refilling my water glass without being asked, telling a story about a patient's breakthrough that was designed. I understood now in a way I had not fully understood before, to remind me that he was a good man who did important work. The story was probably true. The work was probably real. That was the particular cruelty of it. Nothing he said was necessarily a lie. The lies were in the omissions, in the gaps between the things he said and the full picture of what he was. "You're quiet tonight," he said, looking at me across the table. Just tired, I said. Long week. He nodded, accepting this, and turned back to Leo. I ate my dinner and listened to my son's voice filling the kitchen and thought very clearly I have 43 photographs, a deleted folder, and a timestamp that places you in Chicago on a day you told me you were in Boston. After Leo went to bed, I sat in the spare room and added everything to the folder labeled Home Maintenance. Then I opened my email and wrote to Karen Lawson, I have additional digital documentation to share. See you Friday. Friday came with low gray skies and the particular cold of a Chicago morning that has decided not to pretend otherwise. I dropped Leo at school, drove 20 minutes north, and found Karen Lawson's office on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old carpet and good coffee. The combination I had come to associate with people who do serious work without requiring impressive surroundings to do it. Karen Lawson was exactly what her voice on the phone had suggested. She was around 40, with reading glasses pushed up into dark hair, a desk covered in organized stacks that would have looked chaotic to anyone who did not understand the system, and the kind of focused stillness that told you she had heard worse than whatever you were about to say. She stood when I came in, shook my hand once firmly, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. Mrs. Carter, she said, tell me what you have. I told her. All of it, the notebooks, the deleted photos, the second phone, the parallel household entries, the Boston weekend. I laid the printed photographs on her desk in chronological order, the way I had organized them at home, and placed the notebook photos beside them. Karen listened without interrupting her pen, moving occasionally across a legal pad, her expression professional and entirely unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the materials on her desk. How long have you been married? She asked. 15 years, I said. And the notebooks go back 11. At minimum. There may be more I did not find. She nodded once. I'll need access to every financial account you're aware of. Joint accounts, any individual accounts in your name, tax returns for the past 7 years, mortgage documents, and any investment or retirement accounts. Can you get me those? I have them, I said. I had spent the previous 2 evenings pulling everything I could access and organizing it into a second folder, this one labeled with less irony, Financial Records. I slid it across the desk. Karen opened it and began to read. I sat across from her and drank the coffee her assistant had brought and waited. Outside the window, the gray sky pressed flat against the city. A pigeon landed on the ledge, looked in, and left. After 20 minutes, Karen set down the first section and looked at me over her glasses. There's a secondary account, she said. Opened 11 years ago. It's not in either of your names directly, it runs through an LLC registered in Delaware. Do you know anything about a company called Meridian Consulting Group? I did not. I said so. Your husband is the registered agent, she said. The account has been receiving transfers from your joint investment account on a quarterly basis for the past 11 years. Small enough amounts individually that they would read as routine management fees on a casual review. In aggregate, she paused, turned a page, and set it flat on the desk so I could see the number at the bottom. We are looking at approximately $240,000. I looked at the number. I kept my face neutral. That is marital money, I said. It is, Karen said, and it has been going somewhere. I'll trace the outflows, but based on what you've described, the second household, the ongoing maintenance, I can tell you now that this is a dissipation of marital assets under Illinois law. It is documentable, it is actionable, and a court will take it seriously. I nodded. She returned to the documents. She worked for another 40 minutes while I sat across from her, and I understood watching her what it meant to be genuinely good at something. She moved through the records with the particular efficiency of someone who knows exactly what she is looking for and recognizes it the moment it appears. She made notes in a handwriting so small and precise it looked like a different language. At one point she stopped and held a page closer to the light. Jewelry, she said. Thornton & Sons on Michigan Avenue, October 4 years ago, a charge of $4,300 to the Meridian account. She set it on the desk. I leaned forward. It was an itemized receipt. A ring. Gold band oval stone engraved interior. The description was specific enough that I would have recognized it as a piece of fine jewelry even without the accompanying detail. And the accompanying detail was this directly below that entry in Karen's printed bank statement comparison. There was a second charge. Same jeweler, same date, same amount, same description down to the engraving specification, from our joint account. 2 identical rings, same day, same store, charged to 2 different accounts on the same afternoon. My mouth had gone dry. I reached for my coffee cup and found it empty. I did not ask for more. "He bought the same ring twice," I said. My voice was steady. I was distantly proud of that. "On the same day," Karen said, which suggests the purchase was intentional, not a replacement, not a mistake. He walked into Thornton and Sons and bought 2 identical rings and charged them to 2 different accounts. She looked at me with the measured directness of someone who has learned to deliver difficult information without softening it past usefulness. "That is a pattern, Mrs. Carter, not an incident." I looked at my left hand. The ring Daniel had given me on our wedding day was still on my finger. I had not taken it off. I had not thought to, in the way you do not think to remove something that has been part of your body for 15 years. I turned my hand over slowly and looked at it. Then I looked back at Karen. "What else?" I said. She turned the page. The list was longer than I expected. 2 of everything, as it turned out, 2 households maintained on overlapping schedules, 2 sets of grocery delivery accounts, 2 streaming subscriptions on parallel devices, 2 insurance policies with different beneficiary designations that Daniel had apparently trusted would never be compared side by side. The architecture of a duplicate life, assembled piece by piece, over 11 years each individual piece, unremarkable until you placed it beside its mirror image. By the time Karen finished, the legal pad beside her was half full. "I'll have a full report for you by end of next week," she said. "In the meantime, I strongly recommend you speak to a family law attorney before you do anything else." "I already have an appointment," I said. She looked at me for a moment, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. "Good," she said. "You're thinking clearly." I gathered my copies, shook her hand, and walked back to my car through the gray October cold. 2 identical rings, $240,000, 2 households, 2 children, 2 parallel lives, running on the same money for 11 years. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. Then I looked at my hand one more time, pulled the ring from my finger, and placed it in the small compartment between the seats. I started the car and drove home. Before I go any further, if you have stayed with me this long through the notebooks, the deleted photographs, the rings bought twice on the same afternoon, I want you to do one thing. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just the number 9. It means you are still here, you are still with me, and you understand exactly why that number matters in this story. I will keep going. But first, 9. Let me see you. And a quick note before we continue: the story ahead contains some dramatized elements built for the purpose of reflection and storytelling. If at any point this is not the kind of content you want to hear, no explanation needed. You are welcome to step away. For everyone still here, let's keep going. I started the car and drove home. I want to tell you that I felt something dramatic on that drive, that the gray sky broke open, or that I pulled over somewhere and allowed myself the kind of grief that comes with finality. I did not. I drove the 20 minutes home with the radio off, and my hands at 10 and 2, the way my father had taught me, and I thought about logistics, about what came next, about the sequence of steps between where I was and where I needed to be. I have learned how I am built. Emotion does not leave me. It goes somewhere interior and waits with extraordinary patience for a moment when I can afford to let it move. In the meantime, I function, I plan. I put one thing in front of the next. The DNA question had been sitting at the back of my mind since the night I stood outside house number 9 and heard a 10-year-old boy call my husband by the name my own son used. I had not yet addressed it directly, partly because the other evidence had been more immediately accessible, and partly because some part of me understood that DNA was the final door. Everything else I had found could in theory be complicated by an argument I had not anticipated. DNA could not. I had collected the sample 11 days earlier on a Thursday morning from a glass Noah had left on the porch railing of house number 9. During what appeared to be an after-school routine, I had observed this from the lane briefly twice, as part of understanding the daily patterns at the house. I want to be precise about what I did and did not do. I did not enter the property. I did not touch anything belonging to Lisa Harper or her household. The glass had been left on the exterior railing from which it fell in the wind, which was considerable that afternoon, onto the public sidewalk at the base of the porch where I collected it. I placed it in a sealed evidence bag I had purchased at a pharmacy and stored it in the spare room desk. I had Daniel's DNA from a used coffee cup, his from his own kitchen in his own home, discarded in our own trash. This required nothing beyond patience and a second evidence bag. I had sent both samples to a private laboratory the previous Monday. Under a case reference number Karen Lawson had provided, she had worked with this laboratory before and trusted their chain of custody documentation, which would matter later. The turnaround was 7 to 10 business days. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while Leo was at soccer practice and Daniel was at his office. The technician read the results in the flat, careful language of someone trained to deliver information without interpretation. I listened with the phone pressed to my ear and my free hand flat on the desk, and I said thank you when he finished, and I ended the call. The probability of paternity was 99.97%. Noah Harper was Daniel Carter's biological son. I sat with that for a long time. Not because I had not expected it. I had expected it since the first night in some part of my mind that was already several steps ahead of what I was consciously willing to accept. But expecting a thing and having it confirmed are different experiences. Expecting leaves a fraction of the door open. Confirmation closes it, and the sound of that closing is its own particular kind of loss. What moved through me in that spare room, sitting at the desk with my hand flat on the surface and the late afternoon light crossing the floor, was not anger. It was something quieter and heavier. A grief not for what I had lost, but for what had never been entirely real. For the version of my marriage I had lived inside for 15 years, believing in its structure the way you believe in the walls of a house, trusting they are solid, because you have leaned against them, and they have held. They had held. They just had not been what I thought they were. I opened the folder on my laptop where I had been compiling the timeline and added the confirmation. Then I did the calculation I had been avoiding. Noah was 10 years old. Leo was 10 years old. Their birthdays were 11 months apart, Noah in April, Leo the following March, which meant that Daniel and Lisa's relationship had not begun as an affair that followed some fracture in our marriage, some period of distance or difficulty that a person might point to as context. It had begun in the first year of our marriage, in the months immediately following our wedding. Our honeymoon photographs were in a frame on the bookshelf in the living room. We were standing on a beach in Portugal, Daniel's arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun with the particular happiness of people who believe the future is exactly what it appears to be. I did not go look at the photograph. I knew what it looked like. I had walked past it every day for 15 years. That evening, Daniel came home at 6:30 with takeout from the Thai place Leo liked, and the three of us ate at the kitchen table the way we always did on Wednesday nights. Leo talked about soccer practice, about a boy on his team who could not kick straight no matter how many times the coach corrected him about a project due next week on the water cycle. Daniel listened and asked questions and refilled Leo's water glass and laughed at the right moments, easy and present and entirely flawlessly ordinary. I watched him across the table. I thought about a beach in Portugal. I thought about a woman who had been waiting 11 years ago for the man I married to come back from his honeymoon. I thought about a boy in a red jacket laughing at something off camera in a North Side park, and a boy beside me right now telling a story about a kid who could not kick straight, and the fact that these two boys existed in the world at the same time, in the same city, 300 meters apart, and had no idea the other existed. After dinner, I helped Leo with his water cycle project at the kitchen table while Daniel washed the dishes. I could hear the water running, the small domestic sounds of an ordinary evening. Leo drew evaporation arrows with a blue marker, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. "Mom," he said without looking up, "is everything okay?" I smoothed the paper at the edge of his project and handed him the green marker for the condensation section. "Everything is fine, baby," I said. He looked at me for 1 second longer than the question required. Then he looked back at his project and kept drawing. I kept my hand steady on the table and thought about what the attorney had said when I called his office that afternoon to confirm our appointment for the following Monday. "Bring everything you have," Michael Adler had said. Everything. I intended to. Monday arrived with the kind of flat, cold light that makes Chicago in late October feel like a city that has made its peace with winter and is simply waiting for it to arrive. I dropped Leo at school, confirmed my 11 o'clock with Karen Lawson, and drove north again through traffic that moved in the resigned, unhurried way of people who have accepted that Monday mornings are not designed for efficiency. Karen was at her desk when I arrived, the legal pad from our last meeting, replaced by a bound report, spiral-bound 30 pages tabbed with color-coded dividers. She slid it across the desk when I sat down. "Full findings," she said. "I'll walk you through the significant items." I opened to the first tab. She had organized the report into 4 sections: income and asset overview, identified transfers and dissipation document anomalies, and projected financial impact. The first 2 sections confirmed and expanded what we had already discussed. The Meridian Consulting Group, LLC. The quarterly transfers, the parallel household expenditures, totaling $240,000 over 11 years. She had traced the outflows from the Meridian account with the precision of someone who finds satisfaction in following money to wherever it has decided to hide. The third section was where she stopped me. "Document anomalies," she said. She opened to the third tab and turned the report so I could see the page she was indicating. "This is a refinancing agreement on your home, filed 3 years ago. Do you remember signing a refinancing document in October of that year?" I thought carefully. 3 years ago, October. Leo had been 7. We had discussed refinancing that year. Interest rates had shifted favorably, and Daniel had handled the paperwork as he always handled financial paperwork, because he had told me early in our marriage that he found it straightforward and I found it tedious, and this had seemed like a reasonable division of labor. "Daniel handled the refinancing," I said. "I may have signed something. I don't remember the specific documents." Karen nodded as if this was exactly what she had expected to hear. "The refinancing went through," she said. "Your mortgage rate adjusted as expected. But attached to that refinancing was a secondary instrument, a home equity line of credit opened simultaneously for $120,000. She paused. "Your signature appears on the home equity documents." I looked at the page she was indicating. My signature was there. Neat, familiar, the particular loop in the E of Emily that I had used since college. I stared at it for a long moment. "I did not sign that document," I said. "I know," Karen said. She said it without drama, the way she said everything, as a fact she had already established and was now reporting. "I had a forensic document examiner review the signature on the home equity instrument alongside verified samples of your signature from other documents, your tax returns, your vehicle registration, your son's school enrollment forms. The signature on the home equity document exhibits inconsistencies in pen pressure, letter spacing, and baseline alignment that are not present in your verified samples." She turned to the next page where the examiner's technical comparison was laid out in a side-by-side format. "In the examiner's professional opinion, the signature on the home equity document was not written by you." I looked at the comparison. I looked at my signature, the real one from Leo's school enrollment form, which I remembered signing at the kitchen table while Leo sat beside me eating an after-school snack, and then at the one on the home equity document. They were close. Whoever had done it had practiced. "The funds from the home equity line," I said. My voice came out entirely level, which required more effort than anything I had done in the past 2 weeks. "Where did they go?" Karen turned to the next tab. $114,000 was drawn over 18 months following the opening of the account. The draws went to the Meridian account. She let me look at the transfer records before continuing. From Meridian, the funds were distributed in two directions. Approximately $60,000 went to the purchase of a property. I looked up. A property, I said. House number 9, Karen said. Purchased outright, no mortgage, in the name of an LLC registered in Nevada. Your husband is the sole member. She held my gaze with the steady directness she had maintained throughout both our meetings. He bought it with your money, Mrs. Carter, with money drawn against your home using a document bearing a signature that was not yours. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the gray city continued its Monday morning business traffic pigeons. The distant sound of a delivery truck entirely indifferent to the fact that I had just learned my husband had forged my name to fund the purchase of the house where he kept his second family. I sat with the weight of that for exactly as long as I allowed myself, which was approximately 4 seconds. Then I turned the page. The remaining funds, I said. The other $54,000. Leo's education account, Karen said. Her voice stayed even, but something in it shifted fractionally, the closest she had come in 2 meetings to expressing an opinion. Approximately $54,000 was transferred from a custodial education savings account opened in your son's name into the Meridian account over a period of 6 years. The transfers were small, between $3,000 and $8,000 per year, and structured to remain below the threshold that would trigger automatic account alerts. Leo's college fund. I looked at the window. The pigeon from last week, or one that looked exactly like it had landed on the ledge again. I watched it for a moment. He took Leo's college fund, I said. A significant portion of it, yes, Karen said. The account still has a balance approximately $31,000, but based on regular contribution projections, the account should contain closer to $85,000 at this point. I nodded once. I turned back to the report and looked at the totals Karen had compiled on the final page of the 3rd section. The forged home equity draw. The Meridian transfers. Leo's education account. The parallel household expenditure over 11 years. The number at the bottom was not abstract. It was specific and documented and attached to a forged signature and a child's future and a house on a lane 300 meters from where my son slept every night. I closed the report and looked at Karen. I have an appointment with Michael Adler this afternoon, I said. Good, she said. Take the report. I'll have certified copies to his office by end of day. She began gathering her notes. Mrs. Carter, what Daniel has done crosses into territory that goes beyond civil divorce proceedings. The forged signature, the fraudulent instrument, the misappropriation of the custodial account. These are matters an attorney will want to consider carefully in terms of the full scope of your legal options. I understand, I said. I picked up the report, shook Karen's hand, and walked to the elevator. In the lobby, I stopped for a moment beside the window that looked out onto the street. Then I thought about Leo at his kitchen table drawing evaporation arrows with a blue marker, his tongue between his teeth, trusting that everything was fine. I walked to my car and drove to Michael Adler's office. Michael Adler occupied the top floor of a narrow building on LaSalle Street, the kind of address that communicated seriousness without ostentation. The elevator opened directly into a reception area furnished in dark wood and pale linen, staffed by a woman who took my coat and offered me water with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that the people who came here were not having good days. I accepted the water. I sat in a chair by the window and looked out at the street 4 floors below while I waited. Michael came out to meet me himself. He was around 55, silver-haired, with the kind of deliberate, unhurried movement that belongs to people who have learned that patience is not a personality trait, but a professional instrument. He shook my hand, held the door to his office, and waited until I was seated before he sat down himself. Mrs. Carter, he said. Karen Lawson called ahead. I've reviewed her summary. He placed Karen's report on the desk between us, already tabbed with his own markers, small yellow flags at intervals I had not placed. Before we discuss strategy, I want to ask you one question. All right, I said. 5 years into your marriage, approximately 10 years ago, did you sign any document that Daniel described as a financial planning instrument? Something related to asset management, estate planning, or marital property organization. I went very still. 10 years ago. Leo had been an infant. Daniel had come home one evening with a folder of documents and explained in his calm and reasonable way that he had been consulting with a financial planner about long-term asset protection. Something about liability, exposure in his psychology practice, the advisability of structuring certain assets separately to protect them in the event of a malpractice claim. It had been a long explanation delivered in the confident language of someone who knew more about the subject than the person he was explaining it to. I had read the documents he indicated signed where he showed me and trusted that what he said they were was what they were. I had been 30 years old. Leo was 7 months old. I had been sleeping 4 hours a night. Yes, I said. He described it as a liability protection instrument related to his practice. Michael nodded slowly, the nod of a man confirming something he had already suspected. He opened the folder on his desk and turned it so I could see the document on top. It was not a liability protection instrument. It was a post-nuptial agreement. 15 pages dense with legal language bearing my signature on the final page alongside Daniel's and 2 witness signatures I did not recognize. The document was dated 10 years ago in the March of the year Leo turned 1. This agreement, Michael said, his voice carefully measured, was filed with the county clerk's office 9 years ago. It has been a matter of public record since then, which is one of the reasons Daniel may have felt secure leaving it in place. He likely calculated that you would have no reason to search county records for a document you did not know existed under its correct legal classification. I looked at the signature on the final page, my handwriting, my particular loop on the E. This one, unlike the home equity document, was genuinely mine. What does it say? I asked, though I was already reading. In summary, Michael said the agreement designates all assets accumulated prior to the marriage as Daniel's separate property, which is standard and largely uncontested. However, it goes further. It includes a clause that characterizes any assets held in individually registered business entities during the marriage as separate property not subject to equitable distribution. He paused. That is the clause that covers the Meridian Consulting Group, LLC, and by extension, the funds transferred through it. Daniel structured this agreement to ensure that if your marriage ended, those assets would be legally classified as his alone. He planned this, I said, from the beginning. The agreement was signed 10 years ago, Michael said. The Meridian account was opened 11 years ago. The timeline suggests the agreement was drafted specifically to provide legal cover for structures he had already created. He let that sit for a moment. However, he turned to the next page and placed his finger at a specific paragraph. Read this clause. I leaned forward and read. The clause was in the section governing marital conduct obligations, a section Daniel had presumably included as window dressing, the kind of language that appears in post-nuptial agreements as a formality. It was a faithfulness clause, specific, detailed, and binding. It stated that in the event either party engaged in conduct defined within the clause as marital infidelity, which the document defined with considerable precision, including the maintenance of a romantic or domestic relationship with a third party, all separate property designations within the agreement would be rendered void and all assets would revert to standard Illinois equitable distribution law. Daniel had included a faithfulness clause in the document he designed to protect himself. I read it twice. He wrote this clause, I said. His attorney drafted it, Michael said. It's a standard inclusion in post-nuptial agreements intended typically as a mutual deterrent. Daniel likely included it because its absence would have made the agreement appear one-sided to any reviewing attorney, which would have raised the risk of it being challenged. He needed the clause to make the document look balanced. Michael's expression remained professionally composed, but something in his eyes was doing the closest thing to satisfaction I had seen in a lawyer's face. What he did not account for is the possibility that the clause would ever be enforced against him. I sat back in my chair. Daniel had built a legal structure designed to protect his hidden assets in the event of divorce. He had included a faithfulness clause to make that structure appear legitimate. And then he had spent 11 years maintaining a second family 300 meters from our home, which constituted in precise and documented terms exactly the conduct the clause was designed to address. The agreement he had written to protect himself had become the instrument that dismantled his protection entirely. If we can demonstrate the infidelity, I said, and I thought of 43 photographs, a DNA report of forensic accountant's bound findings, and a hand-drawn napkin in a folder labeled Home Maintenance. The entire agreement is void. Correct, Michael said. Every separate property designation, the Meridian LLC, the Nevada Property LLC, all of it reverts to the marital estate and becomes subject to equitable distribution under Illinois law. He closed the folder and looked at me directly. Mrs. Carter, I want to be honest with you. The forgery on the home equity document is a serious matter that will be addressed separately. But this... He placed his hand flat on the post-nuptial agreement. This is the center of your case. This is what Daniel built his security on. And he built it with a flaw he never expected anyone to find. I looked at the document on his desk. 15 pages. My signature on the last one. A clause on page 9 that Daniel had included to make himself look fair, and that was going to take everything he thought he had protected. What do we do next? I said. Michael picked up his pen. We build the case, he said. And then we choose our moment. The case, as Michael described it over the following 4 days, was not a single document or a single argument. It was 3 distinct dossiers, each built to address a separate dimension of what Daniel had done, each capable of standing independently, but designed to function together in a sequence that would give Daniel no useful place to redirect. The first dossier was financial. Karen Lawson owned this one. It contained the complete Meridian Consulting Group transaction record, the forged home equity instrument with the forensic document examiner's comparison report, the parallel household expenditure analysis, the custodial education account, transfer history, and the Nevada LLC property records linking house number 9 directly to Daniel. Karen had organized it with the tabbed precision of someone who understood that a judge's attention is a resource that should not be wasted, and that clarity is its own form of argument. The second dossier was behavioral. This was mine. I had spent 11 days assembling it in the spare room. The notebook photographs from Daniel's office, the deleted cloud photos with their timestamp discrepancies, the phone records showing the secondary device's activity patterns, the observation notes. I had kept in a plain spiral notebook of my own, and the DNA report from the private laboratory with its chain of custody documentation attached. Michael had reviewed each item for admissibility and flagged 3 pieces that required additional supporting documentation, which I provided within 48 hours. The third dossier was legal. Michael built this one himself, assisted by a colleague in his office who specialized in contract litigation. It contained the post-nuptial agreement, the forensic analysis confirming the faithfulness clause's applicability, the filing history showing the agreement had been registered without Emily's knowledge of its true classification, and a memorandum outlining the argument that Daniel's conduct rendered every protective clause in the document void under Illinois law. On Thursday afternoon, we sat together in Michael's office, the 3 of us. Karen with her bound report, Michael with his legal pad, me with the behavioral dossier in a folder on my lap, and reviewed the complete picture. This is a strong case, Michael said. He said it without inflection, the way he said everything, which made it mean more than if he had said it warmly. The financial documentation alone would support a favorable, equitable distribution outcome. The legal argument around the post-nuptial agreement significantly amplifies that. The behavioral evidence, the photographs, the DNA, the parallel records, establishes the factual predicate for everything else. What does Daniel have? I asked. Michael considered this with the same deliberate attention he gave to everything. He has his professional reputation, which will not survive this intact. He has an LLC structure that he believed was legally protected, which it is not. He has a post-nuptial agreement that he believed worked in his favor, which it does not. A pause. And he has, I suspect, a considerable confidence that you do not know what you know. He does, I said. This was true. Over the past 3 weeks, Daniel had been entirely himself, easy present, occasionally affectionate in the rehearsed way I now recognized but had once taken as natural. He had no reason to suspect anything had changed. I had given him none. Good, Michael said. We keep it that way. Karen leaned forward slightly. The question is timing, she said. The legal filings can be prepared within a week. The asset freeze motion can be ready to file simultaneously, which prevents any transfer of funds once proceedings begin. But the moment we file, Daniel knows, and once he knows, he will move quickly. She looked at me. We need a moment where the filing lands before he has time to react. I had been thinking about this since Monday, since Michael had said the words, "We choose our moment," and I had driven home and sat across the kitchen table from Daniel while Leo drew water cycle diagrams and understood that the moment could not be arbitrary. It needed to be the right one, not for drama, not for effect, but because the right moment was the one that gave Daniel the least possible runway between understanding what was happening and being able to do anything about it. Leo's birthday was in 3 weeks. His 11th birthday, a Saturday at the house where he had lived his entire life. Daniel's parents, Arthur and Martha Carter, would be there. They had never missed a grandchild's birthday. Extended family, Leo's school friends, neighbors. A gathering large enough that Daniel would not make a scene, contained enough that the relevant people would be present. And there was one more thing. I had been thinking about the split-screen idea since I found the deleted cloud photographs, since I had sat in the spare room and looked at 2 boys the same age, same dark hair, same year of birth, captured in parallel photographs, taken by the same man on different days. Leo's birthday video was a tradition in our house. I compiled footage each year, a short piece to watch together as a family. This year, I had decided the compilation would be something different. Leo's birthday, I said. 3 weeks from Saturday. Michael and Karen looked at me. I explained the video idea, the footage of Leo's milestones set alongside the deleted photographs of Noah at the same ages displayed simultaneously. Not for cruelty, for clarity, for the kind of visual evidence that requires no interpretation, that makes an argument no verbal explanation could make as precisely. Karen was quiet for a moment. That is not a legal document, she said carefully. No. I agreed. It is context, for the people in that room who need to understand what they are being told. Michael looked at me for a long moment. The filings go to the courthouse first thing Monday morning, he said. Same day as the party. Same morning, I said. Before anyone arrives. He nodded once. Then we are ready. I drove home in the early evening, the sky already dark at 5:30 in the way of late October. Daniel's car was in the driveway. Inside, I could hear Leo's voice from the kitchen, high and animated, telling Daniel something about a video game with the particular intensity of someone who has been waiting all afternoon to deliver this specific piece of information. Daniel's laugh came back easy and genuine. I stood in the hallway for a moment with my coat still on my bag on my shoulder, the behavioral dossier in my hand. Then I hung up my coat, set my bag on the hall table, slid the dossier into the drawer beneath it, and walked into the kitchen. Mom, Leo said, spinning in his chair. Dad said we can go to the Science Museum this weekend. The new geology exhibit opened. That sounds good, I said. I put my hand briefly on top of his head as I passed the way I always did. Have you eaten? Not yet, we were waiting. I went to the refrigerator and began making dinner. Behind me, Daniel was talking to Leo about geological timescales, how long it takes a mountain to form, how long it takes erosion to flatten it again in the patient, engaging way. He explained things to our son. I listened to his voice while I worked, and I thought about 3 weeks, and I thought about a Saturday morning, and I thought about what it means to choose your moment, and then simply wait for it to arrive. I set plates on the table. I called them both to eat. I sat down across from my husband for what I understood with complete clarity was one of the last ordinary evenings we would ever have. I picked up my fork, and I ate dinner. And I listened to Leo describe the difference between granite and basalt with the focused enthusiasm of a child who has recently decided that geology is more interesting than he previously gave it credit for. And I watched Daniel listen to our son with his full, unhurried attention, asking the right questions, building on Leo's answers, turning a dinner table conversation into something that felt from the outside, like the portrait of a good father, doing one of the small, unremarkable things that good fathers do. I had spent 3 weeks learning to watch Daniel. I was very good at it by now. The week that followed had a particular quality I have not experienced before or since. I was living inside two timelines simultaneously, the ordinary surface of a family moving through a regular week, and the quiet, precise countdown of someone who knows exactly what Saturday morning will bring. These two realities occupied the same hours, the same rooms, the same conversations, and I moved between them without allowing either to contaminate the other. Monday. Daniel left for work at 8:15. He kissed me on the cheek at the front door, the same as always. His briefcase was in his left hand. His work phone, the secondary one, was in his jacket pocket. I had noticed over the past 3 weeks the specific way his right hand moved to check it when he thought I was not watching. A small habitual gesture like touching a pocket to confirm a wallet is still there. He had been doing it for years. I had simply never had a reason to see it before. Tuesday. I drove Leo to his soccer practice after school and sat in the bleachers with the other parents watching 11-year-olds attempt formations that dissolved within 30 seconds into cheerful chaos. The father of one of Leo's teammates sat beside me and talked about the upcoming Thanksgiving break, about a road trip his family was planning, about whether the team would make the regional tournament. I responded to everything he said with the appropriate interest. I watched Leo on the field running hard, laughing when he missed a kick, trying again without embarrassment. And I felt something move through my chest, a warmth and a grief at exactly the same time, the way two weather fronts meet and press against each other. Leo would be fine. I had been certain of this since the first night, and the certainty had only deepened. He was resilient in the specific way of children who have been genuinely loved, not perfectly, not without error, but consistently and without condition. What was coming would be hard for him. It would also eventually be better than the alternative. Children always know when something in a house is not what it appears to be. They may not have the language for it, but they feel it. Leo had asked me twice in 3 weeks whether everything was okay. I was going to make sure that it was. Wednesday evening, Daniel's parents called. Arthur Sterling's voice on the phone had the careful, slightly formal quality it always carried. He was a man who had grown up in a generation that treated telephone conversations as events requiring a certain composure. He called to confirm attendance at Leo's birthday Saturday and to ask whether there was anything he could bring. "Just yourselves," I said. "That's enough." A pause slightly longer than the question required. "Emily," Arthur said. His voice had shifted, not dramatically, but in the way of someone who has decided to say a thing they have been holding for a while. "Is everything all right?" I looked at the wall of the kitchen. Daniel was upstairs with Leo helping him with a reading assignment. I could hear the low murmur of Daniel's voice through the ceiling. "Everything will be fine," I said, which was not the same as yes, and Arthur Sterling was intelligent enough to hear the difference. Another pause. "Martha and I are there if you need us," he said. "Whatever you need." "I know," I said. "Thank you, Arthur." I ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a moment, the phone in my hand, listening to the murmur above me. Arthur knew something. Not the details, I had not told him anything. But he had been married to Martha for 40 years, and he had raised a son he loved, and he was not a foolish man. He had noticed whatever it is that people notice when a woman's voice carries a particular quality of controlled calm that is not the same as actual calm. He had noticed, and he had said, "We are there if you need us," and I had understood that when Saturday came, he would not be surprised by everything he was about to learn. Thursday, I finished the birthday video. I will not describe the process of assembling it in detail, because the details were not the point. What I will say is that it took 4 hours and required a level of precision that was in its own way protective, something to focus on that was technical and specific rather than emotional. The finished piece was 11 minutes long. The first half was Leo milestones, birthdays, ordinary afternoons, a child becoming himself year by year. The second half was the deleted photographs Noah, at parallel ages, parallel moments, parallel expressions of a childhood unfolding in a house 300 meters away. The two timelines ran side by side silently and made their argument without a single word of narration. I saved it to a USB drive and placed it in the drawer with the behavioral dossier. Friday evening, Daniel came home with a bottle of wine and suggested we open it after Leo went to bed. We sat on the back porch, despite the cold, wrapped in the blankets we kept in the chest beside the door, and he talked about a patient breakthrough and a conference he was considering in the spring and the possibility of repainting the kitchen in the new year. After the birthday tomorrow, he said, tilting his wine glass slightly. I thought I might take a drive Sunday, clear my head, maybe visit a friend downstate. He said it easily conversationally, the practiced offhandedness of a man proposing something he has already decided. Would that be all right? I looked at the dark garden. The gate at the far end was closed. Of course, I said. He did not know. He was sitting 3 feet from me on a cold October porch, drinking wine, planning a Sunday drive. And he had no idea that Monday morning, Michael Adler would be filing 3 documents at the Cook County Courthouse, that the asset freeze motion was already drafted, that the birthday party he was planning to attend tomorrow had been carrying a different meaning for the past 3 weeks than the one he believed it carried. He thought tomorrow was Leo's birthday. He was right about that part. It was Leo's birthday. It was also the last morning of the life Daniel Carter had spent 11 years building. I finished my wine, I folded my blanket. I stood up and said I was going in because it was cold, which was true. I left him sitting on the porch in the October dark, and I went upstairs and I checked on Leo, who was asleep with one arm over the edge of the mattress, the way he always slept, and I stood in his doorway for a long moment. Then I went to bed. Tomorrow was Saturday, and then it was. I was up at 6:15, which gave me 2 hours before Leo would wake and 1 hour before Daniel stirred. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window in the early morning dark, watching the backyard take shape as the sky lightened from black to the particular gray-blue of a late October dawn. The gate at the far end was closed. The oak tree in the corner had lost most of its leaves in the past week. The yard looked clean and spare, the way things look when they have let go of what they no longer need. I had a list. I worked through it methodically. Balloons. Leo had requested blue and silver, which I had purchased 3 days earlier and inflated the night before after he went to sleep. I arranged them in the living room corners, tied in groups of 3 the way he liked. Cake chocolate with chocolate frosting from the bakery on Elm Street that had made every one of his birthday cakes since he turned 4. I had picked it up yesterday afternoon and kept it in the refrigerator with a note on the box that said simply, "Do not open." Food trays of sandwiches cut into triangles, fruit arranged in a bowl. The small pizza rolls Leo considered non-negotiable at any birthday event. I set everything out with the focused efficiency of a woman who has learned over 11 years of birthday parties exactly how much time each task requires. At 8:30, I heard Leo's feet on the stairs. The particular rapid thump of a child who has remembered mid-sleep that today is something special and has converted immediately from horizontal to vertical. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, hair wild, eyes bright. "It's my birthday," he announced as though this required confirmation. "It is," I said. I opened my arms and he crossed the kitchen and walked into them, still the right height to tuck his head under my chin, though not for much longer. I held him for a moment longer than usual. He did not seem to notice, or if he did, he attributed it to the occasion. "Happy birthday, baby." 11, he said against my shoulder with some satisfaction. 11, I agreed. Daniel appeared at 9, dressed, carrying the wrapped gift he had left on the kitchen counter the night before, a telescope, which Leo had been asking about for months, and which Daniel had, I noticed, purchased from the joint account in mid-September. Before any of this. Before the Wednesday night at 3 in the morning. In another life, that purchase would have been simply a father buying his son a birthday present. I looked at it on the kitchen table and thought about how thoroughly context changes the meaning of everything, and then I put the thought away. Today, Leo's happiness was the only thing that mattered. I had made this decision deliberately, and I held to it. Arthur and Martha arrived at 10:30. Martha came through the front door with a wrapped gift in her arms and went directly to Leo, who she embraced with the particular warmth of a grandmother who has not seen her grandchild in 3 weeks and intends to make up for it immediately. Leo submitted to this with the tolerance of a child who secretly enjoys it and would deny this under any questioning. Martha laughed at something he said and touched his face and told him he had grown, which was what she said every time she saw him, and Leo rolled his eyes in exactly the way she had come to expect. Arthur came in behind her. He shook Daniel's hand, first the handshake of a father and son, comfortable and habitual, and then he turned to me. He took my hand in both of his and looked at me for a moment with the steady, intelligent eyes of a man who has been watching people his entire life and has learned to read what they do not say. "Emily," he said quietly, "you look well." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "I'm glad you're here." He held my hand 1 second longer than a greeting required. Then he released it and moved into the living room where Leo was demonstrating the telescope box's dimensions to Martha with considerable enthusiasm. The school friends arrived between 11 and 11:36 of them in the staggered way of children whose parents interpret arrival times as suggestions. The house filled with the particular noise of a children's birthday party, voices layered over each other, the sound of running feet quickly redirected by adult presence, laughter at something in the corner that the adults could not quite identify. I moved through it with the steady ease of someone who has hosted this event every year for 11 years and knows exactly where to be and when. Daniel was good at parties. He moved through the room with the warmth and ease that had always made him magnetic in social situations, crouching to talk to Leo's friends at their level, teasing Leo in the affectionate way that made Leo laugh and protest simultaneously, refilling Arthur's coffee with the attentiveness of a good son. I watched him and thought he is exactly himself right now. There is nothing performed about this. This is who he also is. That was the part I had never been able to resolve and had stopped trying to. At 12:15, I excused myself quietly and went to the spare room. I opened the drawer. The USB drive was where I had left it, in the small clear case I had placed it in Thursday night. I picked it up. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. Through the wall, I could hear Leo's voice, high and happy, telling someone about the telescope. I walked to the living room where the large screen on the wall had been used earlier to display the birthday slideshow I put together every year, a simple collection of photos from the past 12 months, set to music Leo chose himself. This year, he had chosen a song from a movie he loved. It had played twice already to appreciative commentary from the assembled grandparents. I crossed to the laptop on the side table, the one connected to the screen. I removed the slideshow drive. I inserted the USB drive I had carried from the spare room. The screen went dark for a moment as the new file loaded. Daniel was across the room, his back to the screen, talking to Arthur about something I could hear the low rhythm of their voices, but not the words. Leo was beside Martha on the couch, unwrapping a small gift she had saved for this moment. The room had the warm, distracted quality of a gathering at its midpoint when everyone is comfortable and no one is watching any one thing in particular. My finger was on the trackpad. I looked at Leo once more, at his face, open and bright and entirely unguarded, the face of a child who believes the world contains what it appears to contain. I thought, I am sorry this is happening in your house on your birthday. I am sorry that fixing this required waiting for the right moment, and that the right moment was today. When you are older, I will explain it. You will understand. I pressed play. The screen came to life. For the first 4 seconds, no one in the room paid particular attention. The party was at the comfortable, slightly distracted midpoint of itself. Martha was still beside Leo on the couch. Arthur had half turned back toward Daniel. The school friends were clustered near the food table with the focused dedication of children who have located the pizza rolls. The screen was simply the screen doing what screens do at birthday parties. Then Leo said, "Mom, what is this?" His voice was not alarmed. It was curious in the way of a child who has noticed something that does not match the expected pattern. I had moved to the side of the room, not the center, not prominently, and I stood with my back to the wall and my hands at my sides, and I watched. The left side of the screen showed Leo, 11 years of him, the hospital photograph first, then the progression that any family might recognize: a baby becoming a toddler becoming a small boy becoming the 11-year-old currently sitting on the couch with a birthday gift in his lap, watching himself on a screen with the particular self-consciousness of a child who has suddenly become the subject of everyone's attention. His birthday parties, his first day of school, a beach vacation, a soccer field, a kitchen table with homework spread across it. The right side of the screen showed Noah. It took the room approximately 8 seconds to understand what it was seeing. I watched it happen, the comprehension moving through the people in the room, like weather in different ways at different speeds. Martha saw it first. I know this because her hand, which had been resting lightly on Leo's shoulder, went very still. Not withdrawn still. The specific stillness of a person absorbing something they did not know was coming, and are now with considerable effort not allowing to show on their face for the sake of the child beside them. Martha turned to Leo and said quietly and warmly, "Leo, sweetheart, why don't you take your friends to the kitchen and show them what's in that box your grandpa brought? I think it has something to do with stars." Leo looked at her. He looked at the screen. He was 10, 11 and intelligent, and he knew that something was happening in this room that the adults were trying to keep away from him. He was also fundamentally a child who trusted the adults who loved him. He got up. He gestured to his friends. They followed him out of the room with the mild compliance of children who are being offered something interesting in another direction. The room was quieter with them gone. Daniel had turned to face the screen. He was standing near the window. I had watched him turn at some point in those first 8 seconds, drawn by the silence that had fallen over the adults in the room, the way silence falls when something changes. He was looking at the right side of the screen, at Noah, at 11 years of a boy's life playing beside 11 years of his other son's life, assembled from the photographs he had deleted from a shared cloud account, displayed with the clean parallel logic of a timeline that required no commentary. His face did not collapse. Daniel Carter was not a man whose face collapsed, but something left it some quality of ease, of forward momentum, of the particular confidence of a person who believes their architecture is sound. It left in stages the way warmth leaves a room when a window is opened, and what replaced it was something I did not have a word for precisely, but recognized as the expression of a man who understands for the first time that he has run out of runway. Arthur had not moved from where he stood. He was watching his son. The silence in the room lasted long enough to become its own statement. Then Arthur Sterling, who was 65 years old and had been a man of considered words his entire life, set his coffee cup down on the side table with a sound that was very small and very deliberate, and spoke. "Daniel." His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. It had the quality of something that has been held a long time and is now being released with complete control. "How long?" Daniel looked at his father. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, because guilt implies surprise at one's own actions, and Daniel had made these choices with full awareness for 11 years. What moved across his face was closer to the recognition that the accounting had arrived. "Dad, how long?" Arthur said again. Not louder, slower. The room was entirely still. Outside through the window, a car passed on the street. Somewhere in the kitchen, Leo laughed at something, the sound coming through the wall, brief and bright and wholly separate from what was happening in this room. 11 years, Daniel said. He said it quietly. He did not look away from his father. Martha made a sound that was not quite a word. She was standing beside me now. I was not entirely sure when she had moved, but she was there, her hand finding my arm just above the elbow, not gripping, just present. A warmth through the sleeve of my sweater that said, "I am here, I am with you." I did not move. I did not speak. I had not planned to speak in this room today. That was not what today was for. Today was for the evidence to speak. For the screen to say what 11 years of deleted photographs and parallel notebooks and duplicate receipts said more precisely than I ever could. Arthur looked at me. His eyes were clear and steady and carried something in them that I understood was grief not for himself, not for the marriage, but for what his son had done and what it had cost. "Emily," he said, "I am sorry." "I know," I said. "Thank you, Arthur." Daniel turned to look at me then. Across the room, across the space of an ordinary living room in a house in suburban Chicago on a Saturday afternoon, with blue and silver balloons in the corners and a chocolate birthday cake in the refrigerator, and Leo's voice coming through the wall from the kitchen. He looked at me. He did not speak. There was nothing in that moment that words could have added to or subtracted from what was already in the room. He simply looked at me, and in the looking was everything. The 11 years, the notebooks, the parallel grocery lists, the forged signature, the ring he had bought twice on the same afternoon, the boy in the red jacket in the park. The gate he knocked on at 3 in the morning in a pattern that was not accidental. His silence confirmed it more completely than any words could have. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I looked away. I walked to the kitchen. Leo was crouched over the telescope box with 2 of his friends reading the assembly instructions with the focused seriousness he brought to anything mechanical. He looked up when I came in. "Mom," he said, "did you know this one can see Saturn's rings?" "I did not know that," I said. He looked at me for a moment, that look again, the perceptive one, the one that saw more than I wanted it to. Then he looked back at the instructions. "Cool," he said quietly. I put my hand on top of his head briefly the way I always did. Then I stood in my kitchen on my son's 11th birthday, and I breathed slowly and carefully, and I let myself feel for exactly 1 minute everything I had not allowed myself to feel for the past 3 weeks. Then I put it away. Monday was coming, and then it arrived. Michael Adler filed 3 documents at the Cook County Circuit Court at 9:17 in the morning. By 9:45, Daniel's attorney had been notified. By 10:30, Daniel had called my phone 4 times without leaving a message. I was sitting in Michael's office when the calls came and drinking coffee. I did not taste watching the asset freeze confirmation load on Michael's screen. It arrived at 10:12. Every account connected to the Meridian Consulting Group, LLC, the Nevada Property, LLC, and our joint financial holdings was now legally immovable. Daniel called a 5th time at 11. I turned my phone face down on the desk. "Let him call," Michael said without looking up. "His attorney will advise him to stop within the hour." He stopped at 11:20. The preliminary hearing was 2 weeks later. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit at a table in a Cook County courtroom, not the procedural sequence, not the scheduling, not the language of motions and responses, but the specific sensation of watching something you have spent weeks building arrive at the place it was always meant to go. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Institutional carpet fluorescent light, the particular stillness of a room designed for the careful management of difficult things. Michael sat beside me. Daniel sat at the table across the aisle, his attorney beside him, a man I did not know who carried his papers with the slightly stiff efficiency of someone who has been handed a difficult case on short notice and is making the best of it. The judge entered and the room stood. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired with reading glasses on a chain, and the measured authority of someone who has presided over enough human wreckage to be moved by none of it and fair to all of it. She sat. We sat. Michael presented the financial evidence first. Karen Lawson's summary exhibit was a single-page 300 pages of transaction records compressed into a clean chronological account of what had moved where it had gone and what it had purchased. The judge reviewed it without expression. When Daniel's attorney objected to the Meridian account characterization, Michael addressed the objection in under 4 minutes, citing the LLC registration documents, the transfer records, and the Nevada property deed. The judge noted her findings and moved on without comment. The post-nuptial agreement came next. Michael laid out the argument with the same deliberate precision he brought to everything: the faithfulness clause, its specific language, the documented conduct that activated it, and the legal consequence of that activation under Illinois law. Daniel's attorney argued that the conduct had not been established within the precise meaning of the clause's definition. His voice was steady, but I could hear beneath the steadiness the particular effort of a man arguing a position he knows is not going to hold. Michael submitted the DNA report. He submitted the forensic document examiner's findings on the forged home equity signature. He submitted the 43 cloud photographs with their timestamps. The judge looked at the DNA report for a long moment. Then she looked across the room at Daniel with the unhurried directness of someone who has no interest in softening what her eyes are telling her. She did not speak to him. She did not need to. She made a note on her legal pad and asked Michael to continue. I was called to testify once. I walked to the witness chair and sat down and folded my hands in my lap and answered Michael's questions in the same level voice I had been using for 6 weeks. Which documents had I knowingly signed? Which I had not? What I had understood the post-nuptial agreement to be, when Daniel placed it in front of me 10 years ago when Leo was 7 months old and I was sleeping 4 hours a night and trusting that the man beside me was who he said he was. I did not look at Daniel while I spoke, not because I was afraid to, because there was nothing left in that direction I needed. When I stepped down, I returned to my seat, folded my hands on the table in front of me and waited. The rulings came in stages over the following 3 weeks. I will give them to you plainly, because that is how they were delivered without ceremony, without drama in the flat and authoritative language of a court that has heard everything and is obligated to none of it. The post-nuptial agreement was ruled void in its entirety. Daniel's conduct constituted a documented violation of the faithfulness clause. Every asset protection he had built into that agreement, the Meridian LLC, the Nevada Property LLC, the separate property designations dissolved back into the marital estate. Equitable distribution was awarded to reflect 11 years of documented dissipation. I received the family home at number 24, the primary investment and retirement accounts, and a financial judgment covering the forged home equity funds and the education account shortfall with interest. Leo's college fund was restored to its full projected balance. Daniel received what remained after the judgment was satisfied, which was substantially less than he had brought into the marriage after 11 years of systematic redirection of marital funds. Primary physical custody of Leo Carter was awarded to me. The judge noted that stability and continuity of the environment were primary considerations, and that Leo had spent his entire life in a home with a parent who had been his consistent primary caregiver. Daniel was granted structured visitation alternate weekends and 1 evening per week subject to a court-approved parenting plan. The forgery matter was referred to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for separate review. On the final hearing date, when the last ruling had been delivered and the judge had removed her glasses and set them on the bench and said, "This matter is concluded," I sat still for 1 moment while everyone around me began to move. I looked at the far wall of the courtroom. Plain, institutional, entirely ordinary. I thought about a gate latch in the dark. I thought about a child's voice saying a name through a lit window at 3 in the morning. I thought about a forged signature and a napkin drawing and a folder labeled home maintenance and 43 photographs that a man had deleted and believed were gone. I thought about how completely he had been wrong about that. Then I picked up my bag, stood, and walked into the hallway where Michael was waiting with his coat already on and his briefcase in hand. "It's done," he said. I looked at him for a moment. "Yes," I said. "It is." "It's done," he said. And I had said yes. And I had meant it. But I want to tell you something about the word done, about what it actually feels like when you say it, standing in a courthouse hallway in November, wearing a coat you put on that morning, in a house that is legally, completely, and finally your own. It does not mean finished. Not in the interior sense. The documents are filed, the accounts are settled, the judge has ruled. What it does not mean is that you go home and everything inside you follows the same orderly sequence signs where indicated and closes neatly in its folder. I drove home from this courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon with the radio off and both hands on the wheel. The city moved past the windows in the flat gray light of a Midwestern autumn. I did not cry. I had not cried, not once, not in 6 weeks, not in the courthouse. Not on the night I stood outside house number 9 with my palm pressed flat against cold wooden siding and heard a child's voice say "Dad" through a lit window. I had been waiting. I understood now for a moment when it was safe to. I parked in the driveway and sat for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 because I watched the clock. Not because I was collecting myself, I was already collected. I was sitting there because I knew that when I walked through that door, the one conversation I had been preparing for since October was the one I had not yet had. Leo was at the kitchen table when I came in, homework in front of him, pencil in hand. He looked up. He put the pencil down. I sat across from him without preamble. "Your dad and I are not going to be married anymore," I said. "That became official today. This house is ours. You'll still see your dad every other weekend, one evening a week. That part won't change." He looked at me steadily. "Why did it happen?" "Your dad made choices that weren't honest," I said. "He kept important things from me for a long time. When I found out, I had to decide what kind of life I wanted to build for me and for you." He absorbed this. "Did you know for a long time?" "No, I found out in October. The Wednesday night I didn't sleep well." Something moved across his face, recognition. He had asked me that morning whether everything was okay. "I knew something was wrong," he said quietly. "I know you did. I wasn't ready yet. I'm sorry it took this long." He looked at the table, then back at me. "Is there more I should know?" "Yes," I said. "When the time is right, I'll tell you. What I can tell you now is this. Whatever your dad did, none of it is about you. You are the clearest, most certain thing in this entire situation." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, came around the table, and put his arms around me from behind the full, unself-conscious embrace of a child who has not yet decided that is something to outgrow. I pressed my face against his hair, and then quietly, without announcement, in this kitchen, in this house, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the homework on the table and the winter light going gray at the windows, I let it move. Not the anger. That had carried me through 6 weeks of notebooks and courtrooms and forensic reports, and it was finished. What moved through me now was the grief, the one that had been waiting with extraordinary patience for a moment I could afford to give it. I held my son, and I let myself feel the full weight of it, the 15 years, the version of a life I had believed in completely. I did not call it wasted. I would never call Leo wasted. But I grieved what had not been real, and I let the grief be exactly as large as it needed to be. It lasted a little while, and then it was done. Leo stepped back and looked at me. He did not say anything. He simply picked up his pencil, looked at his homework, and said in the matter-of-fact tone of a child who has decided that forward is the only useful direction, "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" I laughed. "A real one, the kind that arrives without permission." "Yes," I said. "We can have pancakes for dinner." He nodded, satisfied, and bent over his homework. I stood up and went to the cabinet for the mixing bowl. I did not look back. I want to tell you about a Saturday morning in December. Not a dramatic one. Not a morning where something happened or someone arrived or a phone rang with news that changed the shape of things. An ordinary morning, the kind that used to exist in the background of my life without my noticing it, and that I now understood with the particular clarity that comes from having spent several months paying very close attention, was not ordinary at all. I woke at 7 without an alarm. The bedroom was quiet and cool, the winter light coming through the curtains in the pale, unhurried way of a December morning that has nowhere specific to be. I lay still for a moment and listened to the house. It sounded like itself. Just itself, no undercurrent of things unspoken, no quality of held breath, no awareness of a space beside me that contained something I was not yet ready to examine. Just the refrigerator's low hum, the distant sound of a car on the street outside, and from the room down the hall, the particular silence of a child still asleep. I got up and made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window while it brewed and looked at the back garden. The oak tree was bare, its branches clean against the gray-white sky. The gate at the far end was closed. Beyond it, 300 meters east, house number 9 sat on its quiet lane, and it was simply a house. A small one with a covered porch and a cut-back rosebush and a child's bicycle leaning against the rail. It had no power over this kitchen, this window, this morning. It was just a house. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. At 7:43, Leo appeared in the doorway. He was in his pajamas, hair pressed flat on one side, moving with the specific combination of speed and inaccuracy that characterized his first 5 minutes of consciousness every morning. He dropped into his chair. He looked at me. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," I confirmed. He considered this information with the satisfaction it deserved. "Then, can we make pancakes?" "We can make pancakes." He got up immediately with an energy that had not been present 30 seconds earlier and went to the cabinet for the mixing bowl. I got the flour. We had made pancakes together since he was 4 years old. He knew the sequence by now, the measurements, the particular moment to stop stirring, so the batter stayed light. He worked beside me at the counter with the focused competence of a child who takes cooking seriously. And we talked about nothing in particular about a book he was reading about, whether the geology exhibit at the Science Museum was still running about a joke one of his friends had told at school that he could not quite remember the punchline to. The kitchen smelled of butter and coffee, and the particular warmth of a house that is being lived in. I watched my son pour batter onto the griddle with the careful attention he brought to things he wanted to get right, his tongue between his teeth, his eyes tracking the edges of each circle, for the moment it was ready to turn, and I thought this. This is what was always real. Not the architecture Daniel built, not the parallel systems, not the notebooks, or the LLCs, or the gate knocked in the dark. This kitchen, this child, this Saturday morning with its pale winter light, and its smell of butter, and its easy conversation about a half-remembered joke. This had been real the entire time. Leo flipped the first pancake with a confidence that was approximately 60% justified and 100% committed. It landed correctly. He looked at me with an expression of complete satisfaction. "Perfect," I said. He grinned. I picked up my coffee cup and looked out the window at the pale December sky, and I felt moving through me quietly, and without announcement, something I recognized after a moment as contentment. Not happiness, in the loud declarative sense, something quieter and more durable than that. The specific peace of a morning that is exactly what it appears to be. The pancakes were ready. We sat down and ate. People sometimes ask me if I am angry. The honest answer is, I was. Not in the way that burns loudly, not in the way that breaks dishes or raises voices. In a quiet way. The way that sits in your chest at 3 in the morning and does not announce itself and waits and eventually becomes something else entirely. What it became in the end was clarity. I learned something about myself during those 11 weeks that I could not have learned any other way. I learned that I am at my core a woman who functions better with the truth than without it, even when the truth is the worst version of what I feared. I learned that the most dangerous thing in my life was not a man who built 11 years of family betrayal so carefully that it looked from the outside like an ordinary life. The most dangerous thing was my own willingness to trust so completely that I stopped asking questions. Do not do what I did. Do not confuse consistency with honesty. Do not mistake a man's memory for his character. The two things are not the same, and I learned this 300 meters from my own back gate on a cold October night, standing in the dark with my hand pressed flat against the side of a house I had never had a reason to visit before. What Daniel built was not simply an affair. It was a sustained, calculated act of family betrayal against me, against Leo, and in its own way against Lisa and Noah too, who had no more idea of the full picture than I did. He did not stumble into it. He designed it. He maintained it with notebooks and LLCs and a faithfulness clause he never expected to face. That is not a weakness. That is a choice made every single day for 11 years. And this is my personal opinion. For what it is worth, a life built on concealment is not a life. It is a project. And what looks like family revenge, a split screen at a birthday party, a forensic accountant's bound report, 3 documents filed at the Cook County Courthouse on a Monday morning, is not revenge at all. It is simply a woman deciding that the truth deserves to be seen. I believe in family. I believe it is worth protecting not at any cost, but at the right one. I believe that justice is slow and unglamorous, and entirely worth pursuing. And I believe I say this once because once is enough, that there is a grace that moves through the worst seasons of a life and carries you through to the morning on the other side. I have felt it. I am grateful for it. I am grateful to God for it. What some would call family revenge, I would call a reckoning. What others would call family betrayal of the worst kind, I would call a lesson I did not choose, but will carry with me. And what I would call strength. Real strength is not confrontation. It is the Saturday morning in December, the kitchen smelling of butter and coffee, a boy flipping a pancake with 60% skill and 100% confidence, and a life that is finally exactly what it appears to be. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe because there is more to come, and every story asks something real of the people who stay for it. Thank you for being here until the very end. A final note. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed for the purpose of entertainment and reflection. Some situations have been dramatized. If any of what you have heard does not feel right for you, that is completely understood. Please feel free to step away and find content that serves you better. There is no obligation to stay for what does not belong to you. But if you are still here, I am glad. So is Emily.